Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us and our amazing panel speakers that are going to be talking on our report today, but also in connection with the new police crime sentencing bill and what that means for our rights to protest. So this is a very important conversation, and we're really looking forward to having the conversations and hearing our speakers' perspective and their insight, given their experiences and their background and the communities that they work with. Welcome, Luke, and thanks for also joining us. Before we get started, I'll just give it a few more minutes to allow more people to attend and enter the meeting. But in the meantime, feel free to just use the chat box to write any questions that you may have for the speakers or regarding the report. And also just introduce yourself and let us know where you're logging in from today. So just to also say, we will be recording this event today, and it will be live streaming on our YouTube as well. So if you missed any part of it, you can also catch up with it later, but also share with your network if people are interested. We are also on social media at Race Justice on Twitter, but also Racial Justice Network on Instagram. And also check out our social medias, as we'll be putting some of the conversations and some interesting insights that are shared by our speakers on our social media today. Okay, so before we get things started, again, I want to say thank you to all of our attendees in the room. It's important to acknowledge our trustees in the room, Penny and Laura, who have also contributed to the support. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our amazing organizer volunteers who are also in the room and who have joined us today. It's nice to see you all. Coley, Keris, and Wynne, thank you for joining us today. But without further ado, I would love to introduce the speakers that we have here to you all. We are short one speaker, but hopefully they'll be joining us soon. And if not, we do have a video to share from them later. But I would like to introduce, first of all, Mary Atkinson from JCWI, who will be speaking with us today, and also Rachel Humphreys, who was another co-author on the report, Katrina French from Unjust, who will also be sharing her perspective based on her background working in similar areas. And we also have Luke Smith, who is part of the Roman Gypsy traveller community, and also will be sharing his insight and the impacts of this technology on this community as well. So thank you all for joining us here. Before we hear your insights, it'll be really interesting to, just share what our main report findings were and what some of the things we found in the report. So I will be sharing my screen and handing over to you, Rachel, just to kick us off on this important and impactful report. So just bear with me one moment. Okay, so Rachel, feel free to get us started whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon for this really important conversation. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your questions. I'm not going to speak for too long about this report. I hope you have all had access to it, and if you don't, I'm sure we're going to be putting everything in the chat, all of the links. There's also a video that RJN and Yorkshire Resists also made, which I think explains everything really clearly. So I'm not going to speak for too long, and also let the people who are really doing the work talk to you about how this bill is impacting them. So the main findings from this report. So the report was based on freedom of information requests that we sent to all of the police forces in the UK, and about 27 out of 45 of them gave us some data, and all of the breakdown of that is in the report that you can see. And it was about their use of this mobile fingerprinting device. So if you don't know what this device does, the police can take it out with them so that people no longer have to come into the police station, and they can check people's fingerprints, and they can check two databases. So they can check the police database, but also now the immigration database. So it's this link that we really wanted to find out about, and that we're very concerned about. And the main point was really to unearth how this technology is being built, this like digital infrastructure is being rolled out that's really making us all into border guards. And I know that Mary will probably speak more about the hostile environment and the way in which it's so insidious and just kind of infiltrating all of our daily lives. And it affects everyone, but of course it affects some people more than others. And what we found in the report was the huge racial bias in the use of these fingerprint scanners. I mean, it was really quite unbelievable, some of the responses. So for example, in Lincolnshire police, if you're identified as Arabic, 12% of the Arabic population in Lincolnshire has been fingerprinted, and this device has been used. So it's really, I mean, it's quite unbelievable that this is happening, and that also the police are keeping this data and they know it, but they haven't acted in any way to do anything about this huge racial bias that they are also keeping data about. So if you are identified as Arabic by the police, you're 48 times more likely to be fingerprinted than someone who's identified as white European. So we're using the categories that were given to us in these freedom of information requests. We're very aware that these categories are far from anything that we would actually use in the way that we would talk about different people. So, I mean, it was really very concerning. 48 times for Arabic, 14 times more likely to be fingerprinted if you're identified as Black, 14 times if you're identified as Asian, and it kind of goes on like that, really. Specifically concerning the immigration side, some police forces are just using this device for immigration scans only. So this isn't just that the police are kind of sort of ticking this box, as well as some police forces are actually just using this for an immigration reason. So Surrey Police, for example, did 318 checks for the period of the FOI request, which was from 2019 to 2020, just the beginning of 2019 to the beginning of 2020. So 318 checks specifically because of an immigration reason. And in Kent Police, for example, 17% of their scans led to an immigration arrest. So these are not small numbers. These are not inconsequential. Of course, every arrest or any immigration scan is one too many, but this is really, this is quite a large problem. And one of the other really concerning things was the reason for the scan. So a lot of police forces didn't even record or didn't give us their recordings of the reason why they used these devices. But for those that did, it was like 68% did it because they doubted someone's identity. And again, we can really see here the racial bias coming in when the police believe what people are telling them, and now they have this brand new tool to be able to take someone's fingerprints and check them across these databases. So that was another really concerning thing that these freedom of information requests unearthed. And as we found from the way in which the information came into us, it was very sporadic, and people didn't have a real reason for why these fingerprint devices were being rolled out. And so we could see really that there was no training on how to use these devices. There was no policy really that's being generally used across England on how to use these devices. It's all very piecemeal, it's very ad hoc. So we're very concerned that there's been no proper training, there's been no equality impact assessments about the role of this new technology. There's been no community consultation about whether people actually want this technology to be used in their local area. And as you may know, the Racial Justice Network and Yorkshire Resists produced a previous report to this one where they themselves did a community consultation of their members to ask whether people wanted these devices. And 96% said that they had serious opposition to the use of these devices. So we know that people don't want them, but they're being hastily rolled out. What was quite interesting is they are being hastily rolled out across England, but Scotland had serious opposition for ethical reasons for why they weren't going to even trial these devices. So Scotland immediately didn't even trial them. Wales, three police forces in Wales, trialed them for 3 months and then decided against rolling them out. So we can see real differentials between the different devolved governments in the UK. But for some reason in England, they're being really quickly rolled out, again, without proper training or without a kind of overarching policy about how you use them. So that's all very concerning indeed. And I think I will just say one final thing before I let other people take over, is around this use, I think, of the word efficiency that is increasingly creeping in for when technology starts to be used. And I think this word efficiency is what we really have to question this if we are going to talk maybe to authorities, because big private security firms, and we go into more detail on this in the report, so do have a look if you're interested in how this technology and the infrastructure of this technology is being built and how databases are being shared. I won't go into it in detail, but these private security firms that are selling this technology to governments and to police forces are pushing this idea of efficiency. And I think it's here that we could probably push back and say, actually, how are you defining efficiency? Because efficiency isn't just police time in one encounter. Efficiency is about looking at the job of the police, which is to serve the community, and think about how that trust is being eroded, if anyone does have trust in the police, but even more so. And we know that victims and witnesses of crime are not coming forward. And this has been a huge issue. There hasn't been like one really big case in the UK, but I know from Canada, there was like a serial killer in Toronto, but he was attacking people in the migrant community, and it wasn't being reported. And so, you know, these things actually do happen, and they do exist. It's not just people going, oh, victims and witnesses aren't coming forward. So I do think that that's a really important point. And I think whenever technology is being used and people have this idea that it's just an unfettered good, I think, that's where we can really push back and really challenge. So we do also have some recommendations from the report as well. So I'm not going to go through these in great detail. You can see all of this as well on the report. I know that the link has been shared in the chat. So I think that's all I'm going to say for now, and I'll pass over to our esteemed speakers. I feel so privileged to be on this panel. So I'll pass over to them and look forward to questions and the conversation afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for sharing those findings with us. As shared in the chat quite early, it is very alarming, some of the figures that we were hearing there and the use of this device and it nationally, and very worrying to see the inconsistency in the use of the device. So I would really love to hear from our speakers. As I mentioned, we had Teddy from Anti-AIDS Lead, and they're not here with us at the moment. So I would like to start with Katrina, if you're able to just share your perspective of what are some of the things you found with the report, but also how this relates to some of the work that you do as well.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Really like to begin by saying thank you to the Racial Justice Network for inviting me. My name's Katrina French, and I'm the founding director of an organisation called Unjust. It's a community interest company. We're based in London, and we focus on challenging disproportionate policing practices and policies, ones that disproportionately impact Black, Asian, and ethnic minority communities. I hasten to add there that we're also very much focused on communities that are socially and economically deprived. So that includes working class white communities, because this is not just racism. We see classism in how the police deployed their resources. Was really intrigued about the report, and actually dare I say, really happy that someone's writing about it, and saddened that we have to spend our time challenging such things, but was really happy to see that somebody, an organisation, were working on mobile phone scanners, fingerprint scanners. And the reason was because my former life, before I was the founding director of Unjust, and my life as the chief exec of Stopwatch, I was a chair for Stop and Search scrutiny panel. So specifically the Mayor of London, MOPAC, they have a network of 32 London boroughs, and each one of those boroughs have a Stop and Search group. I was the chair for Islington, which is in North London, and then I was elected to be chair for the Pan London. And it was during my time there that the police came to a meeting, as they do every meeting, and they presented this fingerprint scanner device. At the time, I really couldn't understand why they didn't inform me that they were coming. And I don't like to I was the chair meetings where you just kind of turn up with a bit of tech and say, oh, we're going to present this, but it's not really important, but we're going to let you know about it. I was like, well, I'd actually would have preferred for you to have let us know that you were coming. We could have really put some time aside for us to find out what the tech's about, and then to scrutinize and, dare I say, interrogate the police. Well, that didn't happen. They kind of just said, oh, you don't have to worry about it. We use it, as Rachel said, it's an efficiency, it's technology, it's about making things quicker, safer, not having to take people back to the police station. And what was alarming me was that as a part of a stop and search, you don't actually need to give any personal information, because you haven't done anything wrong. So you're on the roadside, a police officer stops you, they say, we believe you've got a prohibited article in your possession. They can search you, but throughout all that whole encounter, they cannot demand your name and your personal information unless you're under arrest or they find something. And in 75% of the cases, nothing is ever found. So I was really alarmed at how the police were pushing this piece of technology in a roadside encounter, which 75% of the time the person involved has done nothing wrong. If you've done nothing wrong, why do you need to have my fingerprint? And for me, a fingerprint is far more, not intrusive, but personal to me than my name. Your name, you can just decide tomorrow, I don't want to be Katrina French, I want to be Laura, I want to be Mary. I can't change my fingerprints. I was also incredibly concerned at the fact that a stop and search is around allaying a suspicion and not taking you to the police station because they, do this on the roadside. We're now having the police station on the roadside. So you're not going to take me to the police station, but you're going to bring the police station to me. Didn't make sense, because once again, your biometric data is incredibly personal. And if the police believe you to be telling an untruth, I'd say arrest me and take me to the station. It shouldn't be then, oh, that's going to be very timely. You know, you've got to pick up your kids or you've got something to do. So if you just give me your fingerprint now on the roadside, we can have this done and dusted. And I found that what they were saying was basically we're going to cajole people into consenting to give their fingerprint, because why would you consent if you don't have to give your name? Why would I give my fingerprint? But now you're under the threat of arrest, because they then said, well, why wouldn't you give your name and why wouldn't you give your fingerprint? And it was this kind of circular argument of, even if I have nothing to hide, I still may want to hide. It's my right. I don't have to tell the state everything. I hadn't realized we'd slipped into a totalitarian state. But the police approach was very much, couldn't understand what I saw was not even, I hadn't even got into the issue of race, but just was an infringement on someone's human rights to just go about their daily business without interference of the state. And then we got into, well, it's neutral anyway, so there won't be any racism. And I had to take a deep breath, because we already know the statistical information in terms of stops is that you're up to 9 times nationally, about 9 times more likely to be stopped as a Black male. And that's just a male. That's not even, you know, saying child or adult, just a Black male than your white counterpart. So I started to think, who's going to be being stopped? You're probably likely to be Black. That then falls into hostile environment. So Black and brown people are not necessarily native to this island. You know, the weather just lets you know that. So the police are automatically going to go to people that they deem to be othered. I have to highlight, in light of Brexit, I really do fare for my European counterparts now, because it's not a matter of just being white is right. If you've got a dodgy accent or you don't sound like you're pronouncing your T's or your I's properly, there's a possibility that you're going to, you know, a police officer want to come up to you and want to know what you're doing. So there was this understanding of the tech not being not neutral. It's not neutral, and that actually you do racially profile people. So there's a likelihood that the people that you're going to engage with are going to come from Black, Asian, ethnic minority communities. And actually, because of the hostile environment, there may be a probability that the people that you engage with may have some immigration status problems because of the hostile environment. So I saw that the police actually were a bit Gestapo-ish in their approach. And I don't make any light of the Holocaust and what anybody that was Jewish went through, but I see a sliding slope here of this is how things start, as we pick on one group of people, and actually before we know it, it's rolled out across the whole of society. And the excuses or rationale that the police provided didn't feel evidence-based. It didn't feel as though it had undertaken any sort of equality impact assessment, that there was any purpose for what they were doing, other than, in my opinion, being home office enforcers on the street. I didn't understand if it was resources. So we can't have, you know, the vans of the home offices going around doing this anymore. So we'll just have the boys and women in blue doing it on our behalf. So I saw this data sharing, safeguarding, risk assessment of individuals all in a malaise. And who was going to suffer would be the most poorest people. So police are usually targeting areas of high crime, and high crime usually means places of high areas of inequality. So that will cover white people as well, but also just because of the racialized nature of our society, Black and brown people were going to be embroiled in this. I'm very concerned because it wasn't clear how long the police kept your information for, whether you could request that information, how that information was stored. So it felt like very much the wild, wild west. So I'm incredibly pleased, I come back to that word, that we now have an evidence base, because it is about challenging with evidence. You guys have done the fantastic FOIs. We've got a narrative that we can now go to parliamentarians, to PCCs, to other state people, but also to the community, because I think this is a two-way street. So we're all about challenging the powers that be. But actually, I'm a big advocate of how do we support people to be resilient and resist. So are people aware of this machine? Do they understand their rights around the machine? And if they do decline and they end up on an obstruction charge, do they have the right legal support to challenge? So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to mobilize, for us to educate, for us to inform, also for the movement to be wider, whilst it definitely needs to be at the heart of it, the voices of people who are disproportionately impacted, so that Black, Asian, ethnic minority, but also poor people. I'll come back to saying, this is my kind of closing words before passing on, this is not a Black or white problem, this is a societal problem, and it will not be solved just by Black people coming out and speaking about them, or poor people. What it requires, and it's really good that, you know, people like Rachel, who are academics, are working in that space with civil liberty groups on the grassroots to make sure that we get the evidence, to make sure that the metrics are right, the methodology is right, so that when we do step into the other rooms of power, we have a very robust argument, and that isn't emotion, because far too often, being a woman, you're told you're emotional, and being a Black woman, you're told you're angry. Often I'm both of those things. So it's not without merit sometimes, but I don't want to be what's the word, typecasted as not having my evidence and it being all anecdotal. So incredibly excited to hear from the other panelists around this report, and really want to just give you a round of applause, because it's been bubbling for a long time and nobody's really managed to get a grip on it. So whilst us Londoners couldn't, I'm really glad to know that you guys in Yorkshire were able to put pen to paper, put out this report and galvanise us. So thank you ever so much, and looking forward to hearing from everybody else.
Oh, thank you very much, Katrina. I think there were some very powerful words that you said there, and, you know, very powerful connotations that you made, and sort of the implications wider of this technology being used, but even the call to community. So thank you so much for sharing from your perspective. And yeah, brilliant. I would like to pass over to Mary, and if we can hear from you and just sort of hear your insight, because I know Katrina mentioned about the hostile environment, so it'd be interesting to know that you work in this area and what that means with this new, you know, sort of bill that's coming through, as well as the technology that we're seeing in this time as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just to start, it's a pleasure to be on this incredible panel, and yeah, congratulations again to everyone who's contributed to the report. It's really, really important and really timely, as you said, with such big changes coming in the next few months with the immigration bill and the policing bill. So it's a really key time to arm ourselves with as much knowledge as we can and put it to good use. I'll talk a bit about the hostile environment, who it affects, and what this fingerprint scanning technology means for migrants' rights. I'll basically be echoing what other speakers have said about how this technology just exacerbates a lot of the bad practices that are already happening. It kind of feels like they've just been sold a very fun gadget to do, again, what they have been doing already, but faster. But just before I get into that, to introduce the JCWI, which is the organisation I work for, the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. So we're a legal charity. We campaign for a better immigration system that treats everyone with dignity and respect. So our legal team provides advice to some really amazing people who are put through absolute hell by the Home Office and by our border system. So that's people seeking asylum, people who are fighting deportation from their families, or people who are shut out of access to the most basic rights because of their immigration status. And our frontline work with clients forms the basis of a lot of our campaigning work. And at the moment, lots of our work focuses on supporting undocumented people who are navigating a ridiculously complicated and expensive immigration system. So we have a telephone helpline for undocumented people so that they can get free and confidential legal advice. And at the moment, we're campaigning a lot on routes to regularization for people who are undocumented, because our work has shown us that the vast majority of people who are undocumented and who are subject to the hostile environment had one form of visa at some point or some other immigration system, but then lost it because of barriers that are built into the immigration system. When you kind of take a look back at the immigration system, it just seems that if you were designing a system that sets people up to fail and push them out of status, you would probably design exactly what we have now. So really long routes to settlement, people trapped in precarious status for years or even decades before they can get indefinite leave to remain, which is like the stable immigration status before citizenship. And having to pay literally thousands of pounds in fees every 30 months just to renew the piece of paper in your passport. And the reason that this is so damaging is because of this hostile environment that has been put into place. So it's a really circular system where people are sort of pushed out of status by the immigration system and then punished like in really inhumane ways for having lost that piece of paper in their passport. The hostile environment kind of, I'm sure it's a term that everyone's heard a lot, but in terms of what it means for people's lives, it's very horrendous. So it's supposedly designed to cut how much money is spent on immigration enforcement by making people like doctors, employers, and landlords responsible for checking people's immigration status. And it's supposedly only supposed to target undocumented people. But I'll come back to that a little bit later, because it doesn't just affect undocumented people. Not just affect, it's terrible that it exists, but it affects everyone, and it affects our communities up and down the country. But yeah, for people who are undocumented or can't prove their immigration status, being subject to the hostile environment means not being able to access healthcare, not being able to work, or having to work for exploitative and abusive bosses, not being able to rent accommodation, or again, having to rent from landlords who are willing to break the law to get rent money from desperate people. But it also means that if you experience a crime, you could end up being detained and removed from the UK yourself. So the police regularly report people who've experienced things like domestic abuse or assault to the Home Office over their immigration status. So it's kind of like an interesting parallel with the fingerprint scanning technology, so that the police already have a 24-hour hotline where they can ring to report people who they suspect of not having the right immigration status. And this is kind of, you can see the fingerprint scanning technology as just a way to make that system more efficient. And as Katrina said, sort of bring the police station to the streets. And it's worth noting that the police are far from experts in immigration law or how these things actually work. Even the national guidance, which is like published online for police officers on when to report victims of crime to the Home Office, has extremely basic errors about different types of visa and how people get status. So it feels pretty safe to assume, based on that when the police are referring victims of crime to the Home Office, it's not based on knowledge of immigration law, but based on assumptions and racialized stereotypes. And we've heard stories of people who go to the police to report domestic abuse and end up in handcuffs themselves. And many, many more stories of people who haven't reported the crimes that they've experienced because they're terrified it will mean getting handed over to the Home Office. So the fingerprint scanning, like, that's kind of what has been happening for a long time already. And again, a lot of it not under the radar, but not a thing that is kind of generally talked about and known about. And in a similar way, this fingerprint scanning, which has been rolled out really quickly and without any consultation, it represents a huge extension of the hostile environment into our communities, and it's a really worrying one. So yeah, as Rachel mentioned, it's been implemented with little to no public consultation, no consideration of the impact on equalities and minoritized communities. And again, like talking about how this makes an already bad system worse, the immigration enforcement system that already exists is deeply racist. The Home Office doesn't record the ethnicity of people who get stopped by immigration enforcement, but it does record their nationality. And after being asked through Freedom of Information requests, they disclose that 1 in 5 of the people who get stopped by immigration enforcement and asked about their status is actually a British citizen. British people are the most commonly questioned nationality by immigration enforcement, way ahead of any other nationality. And that's this is this like system which they're spending £120 million on every month, and the most frequently questioned nationality is British. And it's kind of you have to question what the reasonable grounds for all of those stops are, which they're meant to have. I think there's a lot of questions already to be answered about the system that already existed before this, about the amount of racial profiling that goes on at the hands of immigration enforcement, and then to put a tool in the hands of police that does this but much quicker without any public consultation is a travesty, really. I think this report is a really, really fantastic first step. Well, not first step, but it builds on a lot of that work that's already been being done. But I think it's fantastic to arm ourselves with this knowledge and highlight the way that this technology, like the rest of the hostile environment, just entrenches and encourages racism in our communities. I mentioned a little bit about how the hostile environment is supposedly aimed at undocumented people, but who, by the way, are and always have been part of our communities. But it does affect everyone. And yeah, this technology puts immigration enforcement on the streets up and down the country. It runs a border right through the heart of our communities. Yeah, but I just end by saying that even though the hostile environment is everywhere and affects all of us, that doesn't mean that it can't be dismantled. It actually means that all of us have the power in kind of some aspect of our lives to resist it. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear from the other speakers a bit more about how this technology is going to impact people.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was so helpful in sort of highlighting how we all find ourselves victims to the hostile environment, regardless of what your status is, but also the damage and impact that it has on people whose statuses are being toyed around with by the government and how it might impact them with this technology. But it's also interesting to see the growing relationship and sort of the growing push to, you know, merge technology and the hostile environment and policing. And it is quite scary as well. So I can imagine for communities that are impacted for this, it's only even more devastating. So thank you so much for sharing that insight. I would like to next move on to Luke Smith to share your perspective, having, you know, coming from communities that have been heavily impacted by brutal and policing and, you know, racist policing as well, and just to share with us what some of your thoughts of the report, but also a lot of what we're seeing now in this environment where the new bill is coming and technology is being seen as the most efficient way to deal with the issues that we already have. So thank you, Luke, for joining us, and yeah, I'll hand over to you now.
Hi there, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I actually am from the Gypsy community. Weirdly, I also work in technology as well, so it's a pretty good overlap for somebody like me who builds apps for a living. Yeah, so technology is, you know, it's getting out of hand really when it comes to policing and, you know, the Home Office, the security services. We don't have privacy anymore. There is, and you know, as Katrina was saying, we are heading towards what can only be described as an authoritarian police state, and people don't realize we're sleepwalking into this, and it's only marginalized communities that we see the brunt of it. Like, we're the people they experiment this technology on. Like, we are the guinea pigs. And I always say this to people, and also places like Northern Ireland, where as much as I might disagree with some of the people that are protesting and things like that, look at the way policing is experimented on those people in Northern Ireland with riot police and everything else. And the same technology, like they were deploying drones with gas canisters and things like that to disperse people. Like, this is the kind of thing that we're heading towards. It's no shock to us from our community, as many of the other people here from their communities, to experience violence and brutality from the police. Like, look at the evictions from Dale Farm and the rest of it. Look at the way, you know, young boys from our community are racially profiled. They're driving a van, they get stopped all the time, get accused of stealing, you know, this, that, and the other, basically, when they've not done it or whatever. Happens, very common. Police brutality is very common. A man almost lost his leg. It was nearly chewed off by a police dog that was out of control, whilst the handler was saying racial slurs, and he actually got acquitted recently. You know, an Irish traveller woman gets dragged across a common land while she's pregnant and epileptic, so violently she has an epileptic fit. This is the sort of violence that we're seeing. When we were seeing those protests against the bill in Bristol and places like that, and then we saw the Sarah Everard vigil, this isn't the first time that we've kind of gone to this rodeo. And yeah, I'm sure other communities that are in London, like the Black community and all around the country, experience racialized policing. And one thing I always find that's quite interesting is that people often think that this is a city issue because this is where minorities are mostly. This isn't a city issue. Cornwall and Devon, Somerset and Avon are some of the worst, most brutal and violent police forces in the country towards minorities, actually. And you know, the Welsh police, the Valleys police, also very brutal. What I wanted to talk about really is, you know, like I say, it's a broader theme. It's not just about technology and fingerprinting. We know that our community will be fingerprinted if this gets, rolled out to the rest of the country. We know that. And simply, we also know that, the kill the bill stuff that's going on, the police crime courts and sentencing bill, when it comes to our community, is going to be absolutely brutal. So I'll quickly explain the situation for our community in this country. So there's a massive shortage of permanent sites. There's a massive shortage of transit sites. There's also a massive shortage of negotiated stopping. So it's where communities come to an area, they have nowhere to go. And instead of being on the cricket pitch, the council goes, actually, we've got an alternative piece of land that you can live on for a brief period of time. We'll provide you with toilets. We'll provide you with rubbish disposal, and therefore you don't leave a mess or whatever. And then you can do what you need to do and then move on. So there's a massive shortage of that. This bill, section 4 of it, as we all know, it's a 307-page bill, and it includes all sorts of things that will target racialized communities like ours, like secure schools, for example, which is bridging the prison, the school to prison pipeline, basically. And these schools will be run by G4S and the rest of them, and all the dodgy academy trusts that we already know do horrible things, like police, the hairstyles of, black pupils, students with hijabs and things like that. They already are discriminating against these pupils. They're already expelling and suspending people from our community at a massively increased rate. But section 4 of this 307-page bill suggests that it doesn't suggest a solution to providing us, the 15 to 20% of our community that still live nomadically. It doesn't suggest providing them with somewhere to live, whether that be temporarily or permanently. What it suggests is £2,500 fines for a community that's often socially and also economically excluded. So we tend to be on the poorer side of things when it comes to socioeconomic standing. £2,500 fines, 3-month prison sentences. Now, the worst part about 3-month prison sentence for unauthorized encampments, basically you're criminalizing a form of homelessness. It's as simple as that. You want to solve homelessness, provide people with somewhere to live. It really is that simple. So the issue with the 3-month prison sentences, if you put somebody's parents in prison for 3 months, what happens to their children? Well, their children get taken into care. And there's already a history in this country of people forcibly adopting gypsy and traveller children and putting them into the care system, where their outcomes are often terrible. But obviously, whilst this is happening, you're being stopped by the police. And obviously, this technology will be used to keep an eye on where you are, who you are, where you'll be, and things like that. So, yeah, that is a problem. Then, like I already explained, we often experience police, stereotyping, police profiling, and police violence, really. This bill also gives the police forces the ability to seize goods, including trailers, which is, people from our community's homes, and also their vehicles, which they use for work and to feed their children. So that's what it does. So basically, it's racialized pogroms, essentially. A community that's been here, lived this way of life for over 500 years in this country, is now, their way of life is being completely destroyed. And a lot of us live in houses or whatever now, and it's not so much of an issue. That we still experience the policing side of things, by the way. We still experience the 12 years lower life expectancy. We still experience the mass expulsions, suspensions from schools. We still experience the school to prison pipeline. All these things we still experience. But this particular bill is aimed at tackling unauthorized encampments. Well, if you want to tackle unauthorized encampments, provide authorized encampments. If you want to tackle rubbish, give people access to rubbish disposal like you do your other constituents. It really is that simple. If you want people to pay council tax, well, approve authorised sites where people will be able to then pay council tax. And I'll give you a little microcosm of the situation in the UK. Now, Labour's often seen as like the progressive party in this country, I guess. Like, we don't see that on the ground, and many other communities also don't see that on the ground, unfortunately. But in Warrington, they had the shadow women and equalities minister handing out racist, dodgy leaflets about our community and unauthorised encampments in the local elections. Well, that same council, Warrington Council, has got a massive Labour majority, and yet they were handing out these leaflets whilst they were sitting on £2 million worth of funding for a transit site in their area, which they've had for like a long time, and they haven't even commenced building it. So they've identified the problem that we don't have anywhere to live, but they're still using us as a political football in local elections. And, you know, we get often MPs like Jess Phillips and the rest of them. I mean, the Conservatives are even worse. Let's not even go there. Like, let's not even start that. They're the people that are putting this bill into action. They're the people that are making this a hostile environment, not just for migrants anymore. We should have all spoke up for migrants already when they came for migrants, when they came for the disabled. Now they're coming for gypsies, you know, Roma and travellers. Now they're coming for, you know, the black community. I mean, the Tories have already been historically bad on that anyway. Like, look at the way they treat Black Lives Matter, which is, you know, a movement to say that, you know, we should be treated equally like everybody else, and they treat it like it's some sort of, like, I don't know, an insurrection or something. I have no idea where they get it from. It's just atrocious. All it is about is just basic equality. And this is where, you know, one thing I would plug is the fact that Sisters Uncut, a movement led by, you know, black women and minority women, are leading the way on this. They got this bill delayed already once. You know, let's follow their lead and try and get it pushed back forever, basically. Let's make this law ungovernable. When laws become ungovernable, they get repealed. We have to make it ungovernable. And it's okay, a lot of charities saying, oh, we can't do this, that, and the other, we can't get involved in it. But they've already shown with Stonewall, the Runnymede Trust and the rest of them, they will come for you as well, unfortunately. They will come for the trade unions. They are banning the right to protest. That also includes people that are striking, by the way, so trade union activity. So basically all I would say is, from our side of things, is that, you know, yes, this technology that they're using is important, right? And they shouldn't be using it in this way, and they shouldn't have it in the first place. The police can't be trusted with the power they already have. We already saw that in the Sarah Everard vigil. Communities like ours have seen this for decades, since the beginning of time. They can't be trusted. So why are we giving them more power? Why aren't we using all this money that they're going to use to, you know, invest in grassroots sport and this, that, and the other, and invest in our communities, making sure that we're not socio-economically excluded, that we're not getting excluded from schools and suspended from schools. But yeah, that's all I really want to say, is really highlight the fact that Section 4 of this bill is ending the nomadic existence as we know it, and ending, you know, our community's culture, you know, Irish travellers as well. This is the end. It's just, you know, they talk about conservation and being conservative. Well, they're not. You know, what are they preserving? What are they conserving? Well, it's just freedom for white rich newspaper moguls, basically. That's what it seems like. But everybody else, they're meaning, so, you know, you can't go to your doctor, you can't go to your teacher and have these conversations that you could usually have in confidentiality. They're making that so those conversations are now policed, that, you know, people will report you. Your own people that you think are meant to be, you know, people that you trust, are now becoming agents of the state. Like, it doesn't get much worse than that. And like I say, in this bill, people from our community face losing their children. Like, that's how serious this is. And like I say, you know, all communities really have to stand together and fight this bill, and also fight the increase in police surveillance and the use of technology. Like, they're using a thing called a stingray at protests. So when you go to a protest, make sure you're not having your phone on and things like that, because they can access your phone. When they did Freedom of Information Act, they wouldn't tell you whether they were basically going into people's phones without their permission. So yeah, it's a very worrying development, and this is the start of a fascist police state, and they're gearing up. Yeah, they have to keep feeding people to the machine. This is what we don't understand, because once they stop feeding minorities to the machine, people go, well, who's the people with the power? Who's the people that run our society? And we all start blaming them. Well, they have to keep blaming us and keep feeding us to it, because that's how they keep, I guess, the ordinary person, or you know, people, they keep them blinkered, I guess. So yeah, anyway, thank you for having me. Yeah, let's fight this bill.
Thank you so much, Luke. Those were some very powerful words there, and, you know, we felt what you were feeling, and I think all of us feel that. You really spoke amazingly to the risk that your community faces, but a lot of the communities face, not only with this sort of technology on the rise, but already already by the police. So thank you so much for really speaking to that. But I think that something else that you really spoke to that was really important is oh, sorry, the baby wants my attention.
Very
is
sweet.
The risk that we face as like charities and as organizations and as groups of people that come together to fight against this. And you know, it's one of the things at RGN that we're always constantly thinking about and how we operate to this. So I think, as all of the speakers have spoke to so far, one of the things that's really important is community and how we all do this together. I know anti-raids were involved with that demonstration, that amazing demonstration we saw in Glasgow last month. And I'm going to play a video now from one of the members from Anti-Raids Leeds, because how we really speak to this community and how we garner power together, I think, is what's really going to push us through to make sure that this law is ungovernable and that it doesn't ever come through. So if you just bear with me one moment, I'm going to share my screen and share the video from Teddy. And whilst I'm sharing, whilst this video is playing, feel free to also put your questions or any comments or anything you have in the chat. Thank you so much for already engaging with the chat. Continue to put any questions that you have there, as we'll be moving on to the Q&A next. Cool. So can you hear it? Okay, bear with me. I need to also share my sound. Okay, there you go. Okay, we'll start again.
Hi, it's Teddy from Leeds Anti-Raids Action. This is super weird recording this because I don't really know how much I've said to you. Firstly, thank you so much to Racial Justice Network and Yorkshire ISIS for asking us to be part of this conversation. Other amazing speakers, and it's just proper nice that you actually even want to hear our perspective on it. Big love as well for all the work that you do, particularly around the Stop the Scam campaign. I think this report is just really highlighted how little this is spoken about, how important it is that we hold the police to account. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone here that cops are racist. But it's also really important, like, we think about how that interacts with immigration enforcement, and also like think about race and stuff, and how this plays out with Brexit and that. But anyway, I think most people will know about the Anti-Raids Network after the amazing action in Glasgow last month. But for those of you who don't know us, we are a community group. We are part of a decentralised network of similar groups across the UK who are fighting back against racist immigration enforcement and the hostile environment, and that is primarily in our opposition to immigration raids. As a network, we believe that we are most powerful when we take action together in our workplaces, in our neighbourhoods, on the streets, and we stand in solidarity and we just take action for ourselves. Leeds Anti-Raids take an abolitionist approach to borders. We believe that no human being is illegal, and we also believe that the struggle for liberation is interconnected. So we also stand in solidarity with people across the globe who are suffering as a result of imperialist, racist, colonialist borders. So Glasgow was amazing, right? Just beautiful, absolutely incredible. But I think most people know that activism isn't that glamorous most of the time, and actions like that cannot happen without the tireless effort of community groups and small organisations and neighbourhoods coming together and building these like networks. So Leeds Anti-Raids is still really small. We're still babies, really. We only set up the group in December last year, and we've really been spending the last sort of 6 months doing outreach to businesses. We've just started a stall, like getting materials together, fundraising, all of that stuff. And, you know, we're really trying to listen to what the community groups that are most impacted by immigration raise what they want and what they need in order to feel that they can to oppose it, right? And we're trying to set up like an effective alert system and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's going on at the minute. But it's been amazing so far, and definitely feel like we're starting to build community and network. So obviously part of that initial research we did before we did outreach was doing a freedom of information request to the Home Office. No surprises to anyone where most immigration enforcement activity happens, and those are areas with a high population of Black and Brown communities. So it's Hare Hills, Chapeltown, yeah, Little London, and Bermontoffs, and then also some LS4 and like around city centre postcodes as well. So for those of you who don't know, immigration enforcement officers do not have the same powers as the police, even though they may act that way, and they certainly function in a racist way, so that's something they do have in common. But really, like, the only way they can enter properties is with a court warrant, a letter, or off informed consent. And you can imagine how informed that consent is, right? And according to Corporate Watch, only about 50% are actually done with a court warrant. I cannot remember off the top of my head now what RFOI said either, but a very low number, and quite a lot are actually done from informed consent. So it's really important that people know their rights and how to intervene in these situations. Another really interesting thing that Corporate Watch came back with was around how immigration enforcement officers are tipped off as to potential illegal activity, and they found that a lot of this was through public tip-offs. Their information was actually quite old, so I did a further FOI trying to find out about how they actually find out about this, because it is of low-grade intelligence and public tip-offs. Let's face it, it's probably racial profiling, and I was told they didn't hold that information, so kind of not surprised when I see the FOI coming back with similar information that IJN did. So obviously findings of this report are unfortunately not surprising. I suppose from an anti-race perspective, I just really wanted to like reflect on one point towards the end of the report, which obviously I've now just shut. 1 second. Yeah, so we talk about the recent debates regarding the domestic abuse bill have made it clear that police cooperation with immigration enforcement reduces the likelihood that victims and witnesses of crimes will come forward. I think, like, for those of you who haven't read it, but The Truth About Modern Slavery by Emily Kenway, which is amazing, really talks about this and how migrants are not just like inherently vulnerable to exploitation, and actually it's hostile environment policies, like no right to work for people seeking asylum, like no recourse to public funds, and enforced destitution, and tying domestic workers from overseas with their employer. These are the things that make people vulnerable to exploitation. If the Home Office really, if the police really cared about people, why are they bringing immigration enforcement along to when they're supposed to be identifying victims of modern slavery, but actually really they're looking for illegal working as well. I think this happened in Operation Magnify in 2015. So the Operation Magnify aims to identify businesses in construction employing and exploiting undocumented workers. They arrested 85 victims of modern slavery, yet all of them were originally charged with immigration offences. Using immigration enforcement as part of labour inspection and policing gives perpetrators the tool and the threat of immigration enforcement. And something that really struck me when I was thinking about how not having this firewall between the police and the Home Office was from a, oh god, I've got to find it 1 second. Yes, so there was a study called Consuming Modern Slavery in 2018, and it found that people who had directly encountered modern slavery were reluctant to report as they were fearful of immigration repercussions of the victims. What does that say? it's so important. There has to be a firewall between the police and the highway. So, preaching to the choir here, but we know the hostile environment is racist, it is cruel, it is killing people. I think now more than ever, with the current landscape that we are operating in, we must be working together. Anti-race crews need to be working with the Stop the Scan campaign and the more academic side of it. We need to be like working with campaigning to end indefinite immigration detention. We need to be working to end no recourse public funds conditions. We need to be fighting the hostile environment at every level that we can. We need to oppose Priti Patel's immigration plan. I just cannot believe that for a second that I think that maybe Theresa May wasn't so bad. Like, this is just insane. So yeah, like, just this report is so welcomed in the strength of its recommendations, and I really hope that more events like this will help us kind of link together and that we can continue this joint working. Maybe I'll be connected to answer questions, but yeah, like, thank you so much.
Yeah, that was brilliant. That was a great video. Sorry that I think I was notified that the screen paused for a while, but hopefully you were still able to all hear the audio and still engaging. And we'll try and put up that video for Ali for anyone who would like to see the full video as well. But I think it was really important what Ali spoke to there about sort of getting together and connecting the community and sort of what we do and how we move forward. So we've gotten to the wonderful part of this. The speaking was brilliant and it was really great to hear your insight, but to dissect some of your perspectives a bit more and, you know, really engage with some of our attendees and the questions that they may have, it'd be really interesting to pose some questions to the speakers. I have a few questions here, but first of all, I'd just like to go over what some of the is being said in the comments as people obviously going over from their shock. You know, Coley mentioned not surprised by that fact. I think what you mentioned, Mary, about it being 1 in 5 is British people that are stopped. And I think that is not surprised. He's been guided and rule, picking on communities one after the other. Kerry's also shared she wasn't aware about, or she didn't know about the Stingray tech or Stingray tech that was mentioned by Luke. So thank you very much for letting us know. Marina has said, if at all possible, could people get more notice of conversations like this in future? They would be enable the biggest possible turnout. And I think that would be really good if we could sort of like, you know, continue to share and have conversations like this as well. So thank you, Arena. Keris has also mentioned that what Mary was talking about, not under the radar, but not talked about and paid attention to, kind of echoes what Katrina told us about the police just jumping up and presenting the tech like, oh, it's nothing to worry about. We're just going to present this to you quickly. And it makes her particularly think of how this tech is being introduced through a strategy of hiding in plain sight, veiled through pretense in engaging with community concerns, tweets about the tech efficiency, etc. I wonder about strategizing around revealing the lies and, you know, revealing the lie of this supposed transparency. So thank you very much, Keris, because I think that's a good question, and that's somewhere that we can start off with the questions I have for the speakers. Specifically, I would like to go to Mary first with this question, but also Katrina and Luke, feel free to jump in with these questions. But some groups and individuals and marginalized community advocates are invited to meetings and discussions with authorities such as the police in the name of engagement. Are there benefits of working with authorities? And if so, what are
there? Yeah, it's a difficult one, and it's like a historically thorny question, I think, for like a lot of different organizations from across the spectrum, from like very grassroots community groups to like organizations like JCWI. There's always the question around how much that kind of engagement can be fruitful, and how much it's just used as a way to say we have engaged, which we see a lot on a lot of different issues. I think it depends on like a lot on how the organization is placed, and also on what specific issue you're kind of trying to engage on. There's obviously a lot of things where policymakers are aware that problems exist, and for example, like small bits of the immigration system where it's like they know the problems exist. It's actually like a bit. They know that it's like resource intensive to have this kind of little bit of the system that doesn't work, and there is kind of appetite to change that. That would be like an example of something that's worthwhile engaging on. And then I think, I think there is also often power in having engaged and then disengaging. That's also kind of can be a tactic that organizations can use as a sort of, to take a stance, basically, having engaged and then disengaging. Those are just my thoughts on it, but yeah.
Thank you. Would any of the speakers, Luke or Katrina, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in on it. I don't think it's worth it, personally. I don't think we should engage with them other than through legal representatives. I don't think they're worth talking to. I think the police force in this country is so built on prejudice and racism up to the very highest levels. I think it's so institutionally racist. I genuinely think they interact with our communities to gather intelligence. So that I'll be frank with you. I don't think they're interacting in good faith. I don't think they're going, oh, we're going to have, a meeting with some Gypsy, Roma and travellers to come along to this thing and we're going to talk to them. I don't think they're doing that because they care about us. They're doing that because they think we're a threat. They're racist against us and they want to gather as much information as possible about our community so they can, more efficiently, I guess, crack down on us, essentially. That's genuinely my point of view. Because look, it's all right, the Met coming along and the Home Office going, oh, we'll have more black police officers and all this, that and the other. At the end of the day, when it comes to vigils like Sarah Everard, there's minority police officers there battering the protesters as well. So, like all this kind of gypsy traveller police associations and all that, I have no time for it at all. As far as I'm concerned, once you're in that career, once you're in that profession, I want nothing to do with it personally. That's just my point of view. I'm not saying they're all bad, but at the same time, I get people telling me, oh yeah, your views on this are extreme, this, that, and the other. And it's like, it's not on people to police our views as minority people that experience bad outcomes from the police. It's not on them to tell us we're extreme. It's on you to go to the police and make sure that they're doing their jobs properly and that they're not racist, so we can trust them, right? It's not on us to trust them as default. We shouldn't trust them as default. As many people from communities, right, have learned, they're not to be trusted. When it comes to, the violence that black women experience from the police, the violence that black men experience, the violence that people of color in general, and the racialized communities like ours, right? I mean, the stats speak for themselves about police violence and the rest of it. So, don't come to us and talk to us about our views on the police. Go to the police and make sure that they're different anyway and doing their job properly. Anyway, thank you for that. But I don't think they're worth engaging with personally.
No, thanks for sharing that opinion. Katrina, go ahead.
Yeah, I straddle both ways, like what Mary said and what Luke said, because my cutting my teeth was as a volunteer. So I worked for the local council. I went and saw a sign that said volunteers wanted for stop and search scrutiny panel. Joined the scrutiny panel. I don't think they expected me to become the chair, because when I did, the police made a complaint about me to the council. I then had to tell the council, well, you put the sign up in the staff room. Who did you expect to go other than staff? So there was that, they expected me to be that nodding Churchill dog, the one you see on the TV, and just go along with stuff. But because of I suppose, depending on how you're socialized, how you're trained, your interests, that the system may feel very comfortable to work in. So going from local government, it felt very natural to just pop down the end of the road and be in that space. Go fast forward 5 years' time, I'm very selective about the meetings that I have with elected officials or senior leaders, because of my capacity. So they have resources I don't. I can't afford to be in a 3-hour meeting just to hear the same things I could have heard a year ago. So there's a capacity issue, but also there's about co-opting and then being seen to be engaging when actually you're criticizing, but none of the criticism is ever aired. So I think what it is about having movements that are wide enough, or also people who want to engage in those spaces but understand why they're there. It's a bit like me 5 years ago. I had more time, or I didn't have the position I have or the platform I have now, and then being in that space to ruffle feathers, because it is about hearing what's going on. So we have to be in the rooms to gather the information as well to understand how we strike. But equally, I agree with Luke that those exercises are very much about gathering information on us, or rehashing ideas and then selling them back to the same communities that have been saying this is how we should do things. Nevertheless, I think we all have a different role to play. So if there are people within the Gypsy Traveller movement that want to be in those rooms, we should encourage them to be in those rooms so that we know what's being said. But a bit like Luke, my time is really precious, and I think it needs to be spent more with communities, telling them how do we do the resistance. Then, to be fair, police officers are kind of the ones that I don't have much time for at the moment, usually because they can't make the changes they want because these are political decisions and they're just following orders.
No, thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing your perspective on that question, really sort of bridging some of the benefits, but also the cons to engaging with authorities, especially, and the police. But Rachel, I'd really love to just sort of, having sort of worked on the report and, analysed the FOI data and sort of thinking some of the recommendations that were off the back of the report, we want to know, how do we build power alliances between those with and those without privileges and resources, and those affected or those witnessing injustices? And obviously this is in regards to the academia, RJN, charity organizations that work on these issues, as well as the community, and anti-raids with regards to those that are not directly affected by doing the work. How do we sort of build these particular, relationships with those that have power and those that don't have power?
Well, thanks very much for that question. I really don't think I'm an expert at all. I'm really just learning. And it's interesting here that Stuart from SciMag is here, because I also worked in Sheffield and took quite a lot of SciMag's time when I was doing research. And I always feel like, from an academic perspective, I know a lot of you guys are also doing PhDs, and so you will also have very interesting and important perspectives on this issue. But I think it's like just being very respectful and building those relationships over a long period of time. And in the universities at the moment, there are pots of money around public engagement, around, I don't know what our money was for doing this report. It had some impact, I think it was. And if you can use those funds to build capacity for people who are actually already doing the work, then I think that's where there can be great synergies, I think, between academia and people actually doing the work, where there can be this relationship. And I think it has worked really well from my side, certainly. I don't know how you guys feel at RJN and Yorkshire Resists, but where there are those long-standing relationships where researchers don't just kind of dip in and out and take a huge amount and then just go off and write books and publish things that never go back to the community or anything. So but I don't know, I'm still learning, and it's taken me a long time. And yeah, but I would say those long-standing relationships and kind of maybe strategically trying to get funds out of universities and into organizations and communities that are doing the work and could always need extra capacity. But I'm sure other people have more interesting insights or have other experiences of how it can be done.
Yeah, would any of the other speakers like to jump in on that question to give an answer or share a perspective, or even ask the question to each other?
My only add would be that I think there is definitely a role for academia supporting people with lived experience to record and collate that information and disseminate it, because for far too long it's just seen as anecdotal. So this isn't me saying, oh, we need no, this is not a disrespect to the women, like a white savior. That's not what I'm interpreting here. It's about the academic robust evidence base that's provided through the research that then you can't argue with, although the politicians still, no, not as much as the police still do, but it's then on record that this was said. So as we know, in time, sometimes people hang their heads in shame. At least we've got the empirical evidence there. So I think it's just really important that academics, people that are doing research, if they have those skills and resources, that they're able to give back to smaller organizations, because that's, to get a policy officer full-time, incredibly difficult. And I think a lot of the work in race equality spaces doesn't necessarily move forward as quickly because the funding issue, but also resources. So if people are able to share their professional expertise in a volunteer capacity or pro bono capacity, or just as a steering group capacity, that can be just really amazing for small organizations in terms of getting things going and getting that momentum, but also the credibility of the work as well.
Thank you very much. Mary, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just to echo that really, and I think it kind of, what you were just saying, Katrina, really reminded me of something that Ali from the Anti-AIDS group mentioned, which is that a lot of the work isn't glamorous, as she said, and there's a lot of things that can be done. Basically, yeah, we've mentioned wide movements, and as part of a wide movement, there are like thousands of things that can be done. Whether that's like helping to an organization like maintain their spreadsheets, or like, the kind of, the less glamorous work is something that a lot of people might be able to contribute, even if they aren't kind of, don't feel that they have capacity to do, like, face-to-face, working on a stall to help people understand their rights in immigration enforcement encounters and so on. So I think there's just like, a lot to be said for looking for the ways that are maybe not so like front facing, that that work can be done. And also just to say that, like, we've mentioned freedom of information requests a lot of times today, which has brought me a lot of joy. And I think, stuff like that, like empowering people to have the knowledge to get more information about these things is really important. And I think it's something that everyone can do and has the right to do, but not necessarily, there's not that much, it feels like a bit difficult to access sometimes. So for example, JCW, I've got like a guide on how to do FOI requests and what to expect. I'll drop a link in the chat actually, but stuff like that, kind of building knowledge to empower movements.
I don't think it's not just all about like protesting and things like that. Like, a lot of people from our community are really like scared of protesting and stuff, because obviously, like, we already get in enough trouble with the police anyway. We don't need to be in more. But like, look, there's place for all shapes and sizes, or from people from all communities in this movement, right? And it doesn't have to be getting out on the streets and doing it, right? What you can do is, that I always say to every talk that I go to, is that talk to your friends and your family, like, get them educated, get them, tooled up to deal with the society that potentially could be coming, right? Get them tooled up on what their rights are when the police stop and search them, what their rights are, if they get stopped and they get asked loads of questions by the police, don't talk to the police unless you've got a lawyer, and things like that, that we just don't, like, a lot of people just wouldn't know about. Access to legal support, like knowing who the Green and Black Cross are and people like that. Like, we need to talk to our communities, and we need to talk to our friends and families about racism and things like that, and educate people. The dinner table is a pretty good place to educate people when, so do that. If each one of us goes away and educates 10 people, they go away and educate another 10 people, eventually you're a bigger movement than a protest. You're at eventually you reach critical mass. So even things like just talking to your friends, or challenge them when they say something nasty or whatever, or something that's wrong. But that's it.
Thank
really.
you very much, Luke. Thank you. That's really appreciated. And thank you to all our speakers for the answer. And Rachel, kicking us off there with sort of thinking about how we sort of utilize resources, and Mary thinking about how we get to those resources. We've got one more question that I have, but we also have a question from one of our attendees, one of our amazing organizers on the campaign, Coley, who is asked, should there be a complaint raised with the Equality Commission based on the findings on this report? But I will add that with the final question that we have. So if you just put that in your head. The last question that I have is just really speaking to how we move forward. We often get stuck talking about the problems or the issues, but what is the solution of taking action from your perspective? And what is your message to our listeners? So alongside, should we raise a complaint with the Equality Commission? What is your message to the listeners, and how, summarize everything you said from your perspective? I will go first we'll start with Katrina, and then, feel free to jump in.
Okay, so message. Okay, I want people to read the report if they haven't. So it's the first thing is, if you haven't, read the report, share the report. I think often we're taking our news from the media, and it's really biased. So we really need to read objective, evidence-based reports, and we need to take the time to do that. I know we all want to contribute and we all have something to say, but often staying silent and thinking on stuff before we speak is really important. So I think there's something about reading the report. In terms of people that are experiencing disproportionate policing, please record that, whether that is in the moment with your phone, and I say to do this safely, or you contact Unjust, where Katrina at unjust.org.uk. We're happy to help you and signpost you to really good legal representation should you need it. And the reason I say record, though, is I feel that going forward, we need to look at a really big strategic legal challenge, and that is going to need to have the evidence base. So my main thing is, if we know that children are having their fingerprints taken, and I say children because I have to look for the low-hanging fruit here, who does society sympathize the most? We still have our children as the protected people. So I say look at the under 18s and saying, share with your parents if something's happened. Untoward parents, do speak to your children about what the police are and aren't allowed to do, because they'll just think they're allowed to give their fingerprint over and not know that this has even happened for you to challenge. So there needs to be some really open conversations at the dinner table and amongst our peer groups about what we're trying to do. And if I want to be more robust about what we need to do is, if protesting is your thing, you really need to be out on the streets, because there may be a time you won't be able to do that anymore. And if it isn't your thing and you're much more politically astute in terms of writing, then start writing to your MP, start writing to your local councillors. Please sit on the safer neighbourhood boards, make your voice heard. I think it was Gilles in the comments who spoke about why he goes along to the meetings, and I think it is important to be present, because if there is no opposition, people would think that it's fine. So sometimes you do go to the meeting not because you think you're going to be heard or things will change. It will be because you was the dissenting voice, and we need that. So I think you have to accept there's a mix of how we can challenge. For some people, it is direct action. For others, it's writing to your MP. I'd also say volunteer for groups such as Racial Justice Network. Ask them, how can we serve? It might be that you're good with Twitter, you're good with writing. There's organizations always need resource. So maybe you're internal helping us to build our capacity to fight, or actually you're using your initiative and getting out there in a different way. But attending events like this is also another way to build your network, but also to mobilize and learn. I think this is a learning journey for all of us. And I'll be quiet because my doorbell's just gone. So
thank you very much, Katrina. We can go to Rachel next.
I think I just want to echo everything Katrina just said. I tell my students, now just to get involved in their local community, do whatever they can, what is around them that they care about. Is it putting some traffic lights up, putting a pedestrian crossing up, just to start people getting involved in their local community, or to start acting, right? To know that you have power and that you can do things, and you start with small things and then you build up. So that's what I tell my students. But I do think writing to local people, your elected representative, is really, really important. And I think that's where, so I did some work in San Francisco, and I think that's really where in the US they really have it very strong, is that they do phone drives to their elected representative, and they don't allow them to forget that there are huge numbers of people that are going to be not voting for them if they don't speak up on a particular thing. So that's, I would also say that as well. But basically just everything Katrina just said.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And we'll go to Luke next before we move over to Mary.
Yeah, I think Katrina's done a pretty good summary of everything. Like I say, like, what more is there to add, right? Record everything. Look, they can't lie if you've got them banged to rights on camera, right? That's the truth of it. And, you know, the amount of times we see police officers lying and everything else in between, right? Look, some of them went and had kids with climate activists, right? Without their knowledge and things like that. They literally got into relationships, abused those relationships, and left those women with children, and they never heard from them again. They're the kind of people we're messing with here. Record everything. They will lie through their teeth. They will manipulate everything. Make sure you know your rights. Make sure you know a good lawyer. You know, just be really careful out there, basically. But like I say, you know, there's space in this movement for everybody. Doesn't matter how small or how big, right? Just take a little bit of rice from the pile, right? And we can start removing it as we go. But we really need to oppose these bills. And when they come for different communities like disabled people and everything, we really need to get out and, you know, show them, like also May Brown, like the Siende, who's in prison, right, for fighting back against racist attackers, right? She's the one that's been put in prison for it. What the hell is going on in this country? Like, it's an absolute joke. Yeah, and like people from our community experience mass, like, proper violence. Like, they killed a boy called Johnny Delaney right in the streets. Like, people are experiencing actual racial violence now in this country. So we all need to stand together. But basically, what Katrina said. So yeah, thanks for having me.
No, thank you so much, Luke. Again, that was very much felt, and I think we're all feeling that. So last but not least, Mary, before I pass over to Laura to close for us, but thank you all for sticking with us. I know it's 5:30 now, so we'll be summarising within the next 2 to 5 minutes. So thank you for sticking with us. Mary, what are your messages to the listeners?
Very quickly, not going to take up too much more time. On the fingerprint scanning specifically, yes, Equality Commission, I do think that's something we should definitely start thinking about, and this report and the evidence it contains will be really important as we go forward with that. And yeah, I think at this stage, like, knowing your rights is probably the most important thing when it comes to these scanners, because as we all know, there's a massive difference between what's in the guidance or what we're told is happening and what happens on the ground. And I think there's, everyone can reach out to local networks, and I think that's something that is really important for anti-raids groups to do as well, to start kind of disseminating information about this technology being used. And then for talking about the hostile environment more generally, there's loads and loads of things that people can do. As we've mentioned many times, there's writing to MPs, talking to local councillors, setting up a reading group to discuss kind of borders and the damage that they do. We've got a whole toolkit actually, which has like a bunch of different actions that people can take, and just suggestions of other things that people can do. So I'll drop that in the chat now. But also one other thing, we've got a bunch of information about migrants' rights to protest. So kind of the legal implications of protesting for people who might have precarious immigration status. So I will drop that in the chat as well, because that, I think, is an important resource that people can share as we kind of take to the streets.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you for those resources that you've shared. Please look at the resources that's been shared in the chat and get in contact with us if you're not able to get access to them, and then we can share them with you as well, as they would be saved. But Laura, thank you. I'll hand over to you to just sort of summarize and lead us to our exit. Thank you.
Just to say thank you to everyone, to the panelists and everyone that's joined, and for sharing space to have these conversations, and for everything that you guys do. I think everyone touched on different aspects of why, not only the surveillance, but policing and wider implications on border violence and institutional racism. It affects all of us. It's not just around marginalized communities. I think Luke said it, like, today they'll come for me, tomorrow they'll come for you. So we really do need to talk about solidarity. I think another point that has been touched as well is, people are positioned in a very different way. So, if you're a British citizen, if you're not, I mean, those have different implications on the type of action. Like, I don't feel safe going to a protest, for example, and I never do. And I think we need to acknowledge that, and that we do what we can with what resources we have, and that we have to also talk about self-care, but also group care and collective care. And I think that's one of the things that at RGN and at Yorkshire Resist, we really are keen on. Like, people have different times to dip in and out. And I think it's really important that we do that as well, and acknowledge that, because this white supremacist capitalist system is built to burn you out. And to put us one against the other. So it's really about how do we bridge that solidarity, but also those moments of happiness and love as well as a community. I think Katrina said something that just shook me to the core of how fingerprints are personal. I mean, we can change our names, but we cannot change our fingerprints. And I think that's just one of the key issues, and how the police station is being brought to us on the streets. And I think that, it just really shook me to the core. Um, I think one of the things that Mary said around how easy it is to become undocumented or to be in trouble with the law. I mean, if you look at the asylum process in itself, and how people can fall into destitution, for example, it's just so easy then to have these laws criminalize you even more so, just because of where you are and how the system is designed. Luke also mentioned, this is something affects all of us. I'm also a trade unionist, and I'm active. I'm really active in my union, and this is one of the things that will also have huge implications as well. So again, it's like, if they come for you, they come from all of us. So we all have to, talk and do what we can, as Katrina was saying. If we need to be in the room, those of us that can go into the room, because some of us can't go into the room, we can't talk to authorities. So it's doing what we can. And I think finally, Luke also connects these issues around, they're trying to criminalize our communities, our way of lives, and that's part of a colonial sort of backdrop to all of this. So again, I just want us to come back to community love, and kind of reinforcing our communities, our cultures, our language, our love for each other, because that's also part of resisting as well, and that's part of protesting.